Shalom and Brocha. Let's learn Parsha's Sisa. You might understand that I receive many telephone calls during a day. And that's not surprising. It's given the nature of my position. And with lockdown and all that's been going on this past year, it's been even more. And besides telephone calls, people have access to Zoom calls and all kinds of FaceTime, and so it's busy. And I figured, one day I'd like to write a book about all the calls over all the years, the ones that really changed things, or at least helped others in a meaningful way. So 1 minute, don't worry, I won't mention any names. So there's no need for you to stop calling me yet. But the sheer pageantry that is the human condition is often played out over a phone call. Recently, a younger man, he was obviously overwrought, and he called me and his voice was shaking and he was quivering, and I could tell that I'm in for a long schmooze. And he spewed out a tale of woe. He says his best friend, someone who he grew up with, had insulted him in public and screamed at him at the top of his lungs. And the poor guy was in pieces. You could feel his pain through the phone. So I tried to calm him. I was hoping I could somehow talk him down from the heights of his anguish. And I asked him if this was something his friend was prone to do. Maybe the guy has a short fuse. I don't know. Did he ever do that before? No. It came out of nowhere. So I shared with him a thought that is about Parsha's Sisa. After the sin, the chet of the golden calf, Moshe went to Hashem to plead for the nation. So he sought that we should be forgiven for what is a horrendous sin. And if you will, he was acting as our defense attorney. As such, you'd expect. He would try to tone down what actually happened, so as to present the situation in such a way, maybe a better light, extenuating circumstances. Instead, we find, it seems, that Moshe, he ramps things up. The Torah tells us, the passage says, Moshe returned to Hashem and said, I pray this people has committed a great sin and have made for themselves gods of gold. Great sin. Nowhere else do we see that until this point. The attorney for the defense is telling the ultimate judge, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not only have they sinned, but this is a huge sin. This is a great sin. Now, what kind of defense is that? So the Rebbe of Wurke, who was known as the Batitshiva Rebbe of Poland, because of his tremendous compassion and his love for all Yidden. So on this passage, the Rebbe explains, Moshe Rabbeinu sought to show Kaviyuchel the Eibishter that it wasn't possible for the Jews to do such a desecration on their own. They would have never done such a thing. It was just yesterday they stood on Har Sinai and accepted the Torah directly from Hashem. So it's beyond the realm of reason for them to commit such a great sin. So the Rebbe, this was a great sin, meaning, and there must have been something beyond their control that was driving them. You say in Yiddish, Therefore, they had suddenly lost their ability to choose right from wrong. Something happened. And the Medrash tells us that when the Yidden didn't see Moshe Rabbeinu returning after 40 days on Har Sinai, so the Yetzer Hara came along, and he created a scenario wherein the people were led to believe that their cherished leader had passed away on the mountain. They even saw a vision, some kind of they were in trance, a vision wherein the body of Moshe was being taken by Malachim into the heavens. This sudden shock threw them into such a deep doubt, a deep cleft. They were in such despair, such a thing. And it was at that moment that depression took hold. This was tailor-made situation for the Yetzer Hara. So he created this so as to cause them to do an avera, to do a sin. So says the Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu demonstrated that since their actions were coming from their own free will, because they were thrown into this, the Abishah just has to forgive them. Right? It wasn't, they weren't thinking. They were thrown into a lie, into a deep morass. So the Rebbe said, so Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Eibishter, you have to forgive them. This is not who they are. Now back to my phone call. I shared with my distraught caller this Torah, this insight, and explained that deviant behavior in such as his best friend yelling at him like that can come from several places. Some criminal, others psychological. It's a pathological thing that's happened. People are complicated. People are complicated. I have spoken to doctors and to psychologists, psychiatrists. I'm never astounded because people act out on things. You have no idea what's going on in your beyond the Reshus Rabbim, the public face of people. Those Yidden were Kedusha, were holy people. They had been closer to the Eibush than humanly possible, yet they acted out of character. There must have been something going on here beyond all our understanding. That sudden depression, orchestrated by the Yetzer Hara, caused that moment of madness. When a loved one kicks off and attacks you for no apparent reason and totally out of any norms that he's usually, you should stop and think, this isn't my friend. This isn't my best friend. Something else is going on here. I often counsel people with problems with families, etc., etc. I said, most arguments are not about what they're arguing about. Most arguments people have with close loved ones are about something else entirely. Something that's embedded somewhere deep, with something bothering them. They're picking on one point. So when this happens with a close friend, I told him, this isn't your friend. Something's going on here. He just may be under severe pressure. You don't know. Or something has happened in his life that is making him act out of character. It is the only sensible thing that can make sense from such a sudden change. So instead of holding a grudge, I told him, being forever unforgiving, holding a faribble till 120, think for a moment. Good friends are just that. They're good. Because they are trusted to watch out for you. If this sudden action that belies everything that you know about this guy, Perhaps their great sin is being caused by elements that you can't begin to be aware of. We don't know. So we all must be more understanding and not so judgmental of one another. Marriages must be built on this, as well as friendships. If a loved one does or says something completely out of character, I'm not talking about abusive situations, it's a whole different ballgame. Talking about something out of character. Stop before lasting damage is done. Catch your breath. Think, is this really that person that I love? Then forgive that moment, just as Hashem forgave us. Kol Tov.